And now I realize that I'm turning into my dad, and this is very distressing. Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. Today I'm doing a book review of sorts of Iron Widow by Qiran J. Zhao, which is a YA sci-fi fantasy from 2021 from Penguin Random House. So I want to apologize in advance if I pronounce anything wrong in this review. I did go on Google pronunciation and look up some things, but yeah, so I'm just going to say that right out the gate, that I do apologize if I say anything wrong. So I read this book as part of Interstellar Book Club's November read. So this is my second time filming this review. When I first read the novel, while I did find it engaging and entertaining, it didn't blow me away like it appears it did most people. So I went on Goodreads, and while it appears some people shared my opinion on certain aspects, I detected a lot of kind of fandom gatekeeping going on from those who loved it and from those who presumably are fans of the author's YouTube channel. I was unaware they had a channel until after I finished the book, so I didn't know anything about the author or the book when I went into it. As such, I discussed the book with the other readers in the club in order to flesh out why I was feeling differently about the book than them, and I've come to a few conclusions that I think I'll try to explain in this video. So I still think my reaction to the novel is valid, but I also see where others are coming from, so I'm going to try to address that. First of all, for those who don't know what this book is about at all, this novel is inspired by Wu Zetian, which is China's only female emperor. One thing about the novel is that it's not an alternate history of China set hundreds of years in the future, as I assumed while reading, but only realized afterwards. But it's on another planet altogether where stuff is loosely based on Chinese history. So that actually explains a lot, and that actually changes how If I had known that going in, I don't think the twist in the end would have surprised me as much. Anyway, I'm just going to say that. So, Huaxia, I think, is trying to protect the Great Wall against these creatures called the Hundans. So they use these mechs called chrysalises to fight these monsters. The battles are broadcast to the citizens with drones. You know, the pilots use this magic called Ki to transform the mechs into East Asian mythological creatures. It's like if Pacific Rim or Evangelon had magic on top of giant robots. And I love Pacific Rim. I love it. So this aspect is really fun, and the mech battles are great. For those mechs to work, though, they need both a pilot and a co-pilot. Kind of like drifting in Pacific Rim, but there's a twist. So the main pilot is always male, and the secondary pilot is always female, and she's called a concubine. Usually she dies in battle due to the mental strain of fusing her brain with the stronger male one, which tends to take over and use her life force to make the boy even stronger. So basically he leeches her power and then makes himself stronger, and she dies. This is something contested in the novel, as it should be about why the boys are always stronger. So this concept, and then the murder of girls, basically ties into a very patriarchal society that treats women as expendable and lesser. Think like 1950s American stereotypes times 50 or 100. So Wu Zetian, the main character, is a strong-willed teenager who, after her sister is killed in the concubine manner, enlists in the army to avenge her sister's death and kill the pilot. So yeah, the premise is actually quite awesome and something we don't usually see. I loved it. I loved the mecha kaiju aspect, and I love the non-Western focus. I'll go through what I really liked first before I get into kind of the stuff that I was a little bit about. So the story moves at a very fast pace, and the prose is very easy to understand. I read this book very, very quickly, and nothing about the story was confusing. There are some really impactful scenes that are well described and easy to picture. The novel takes a hard stance on feminism that I appreciated, because oftentimes books skirt around it or they don't make it as obvious as this one about what they're trying to say, and this one definitely is no, patriarchy is bad and here's the reasons why, and I thought that was really, really, really ambitious. The battle scenes, as I said, are really fun, and I love the way the technology was infused with this magic, as I said, called Ki, which is taken, as I understood it, from the life force of a person. I could look up the author's YouTube if I wanted to learn more, but I'm of the mindset that you shouldn't need to go to an external source to understand an aspect of a world building. So as such, this leads me into the world building. So the way the Ki magic functioned wasn't really intuitive upon reading, but did I need this? Not really. I didn't really care how or why the mechas were evolving or upgrading or whatever they were doing in battle. This is the typical thing that happens in the mecha kaiju genre, so I just accepted it. You know, the battles were fun, and that's all that mattered to me. I didn't really need a technical explanation of how the keys mastered one another. Basically, there's a diagram at the start. And it reminds me of this game I used to play on my phone called Legendary, which was like a gem battling game, and it basically reminded me of that. So I kind of understood it based on that gem battling game, which was really fun. So the setting is intended as a platform, basically, to talk about and to show injustice, to talk about gender roles, sexism, and patriarchy to younger readers who, given the age range of YA, which I'm assuming is like 13 to 17 or so, people who have grown up today in society far more equal than even the one when I grew up in the 90s. I was born in, oh my God, the 80s. I'm old. So this was very harrowing to read, and it was very well done. That being said, I wanted to know more about the world itself outside of Huexia. How does Huexia work with the other provinces' countries? Are there other countries that are besieged by Hundans? Does Huexia work with these nations? I wanted less Zetian and her boyfriends and more politics, I guess. I wanted to kind of know more about the world. Like we see in Pacific Rim, how the other countries come together to fight against the alien monsters. So we don't really see that in this book, though. I'm not really sure if there even is another province other than the one that's being accosted and then the one that the Hundans are residing in. So the characters. This is one thing that brought the book down for me. The characters, and this is just a personal opinion, this is not a flaw or something of the novel, they just weren't interesting to me personally. Zetian begins as the typical YA heroine. She's tough, brave, resourceful, she has to overcome some issue to truly find herself, etc. And that is wonderful. That is great. I love that we have strong female role models now for girls growing up and for boys to see. So this is, I think that aspect is great. It just doesn't work for me, given the fact that it doesn't that's not my state of mind at the moment. And I don't really want to, when I read, transport myself back into being 16 or so. So for me, I'm just I don't want that. So this is why, if you can guess, if you follow my channel, I'm not a big reader of YA. Basically, I read YA once in a blue moon. So, this is, I think, one of the 2 I read this year out of the 70 books I read. Maybe this might be the only one. I don't remember. Anyway, I will give a YA story a chance like this one if it sounds really interesting. But nothing about Zetian herself really spoke to me. I will say, as I said, had I read it when I was 17, I likely would have loved her, just as I loved Uma Thurman's character, the bride, in Kill Bill when I was 17. I think I was 17 or 18 when that came out. Anyway, so these 2 stories, I'm going to talk about Kill Bill for a minute, I guess. These 2 stories are very different, but they both center a woman's revenge quest that carves, a bloody swath through the antagonists, and that was appealing to me. Yet, I will say, as much as I'm not super fond of Tarantino's recent work, the bride's character arc in Kill Bill is balanced with the violence she bestows on the characters she fights. The bride kills dozens of people in those movies, but while she is morally gray, I would argue that she's not a villain for doing so. All the people she fights, kills, tried to murder her and or they rushed to fight her, so she fought them back. It's more like self-defense. She doesn't murder anyone except that one guy, Buck, but, he deserves it 100%. She doesn't, kill kids or innocent bystanders. She feels regret when she kills a girl's mother, even if that was in self-defense and retribution. There's still the understanding that murder, taking someone's life in something other than self-defense or a duel is wrong. If we look at Katniss from Hunger Games, to use another YA example, she only assassinates, I think, that one person, and she regrets it deeply. It breaks her almost, and that's almost like a big part of her character arc. Zetian doesn't fit this, I guess, arguably human moral code, and I find it perplexing in a YA heroine specifically. After talking to the others in the group, they argued persuasively, and definitely I was open to listening, that Zetian's murders and callous disregard for others' lives later in the story are reflective of her realizing that her life has value and she's no longer going to put up with other people's mistreatment of her. I 100% totally understand the perspective. But where I get a little bit perplexed again is that I think there's a difference between standing up for yourself and becoming one of the bad guys. And this refers to a very specific scene in the book. So Zetian tortures a man in a pretty disturbing way. Granted, he's a terrible guy. I'm not saying he didn't deserve it. But aren't we taught through all our movies and books that what differentiates the good guys from the bad isn't rationale, but restraint? It's not stooping to their level. It's not tying into your base desire to murder someone. Had they just shot the man to stop him from continuing with his practices, or as a lesson to everyone else in power, or something less awful than prolonged physical and emotional torture, it would have sat better with me. Given this is a book for young adults, teenagers, I found that hard to grapple with. Then again, I can see the perspective that if it had been me in their position, would I have done the same thing as these kids to that guy? I don't know, because I've never been in that kind of scenario, thankfully. Do I want my daughters, though, to read this book at 13 and think it's okay to torture someone even if they deserve it? No. And now I realize that I'm turning into my dad. And this is very distressing. See, now I'm having a bit of a crisis, because when I was 13, 14, and if I had access to this stuff, which I did because I loved violent movies and books, And my dad thought it was a bad thing because he thought I was going to grow up to become a serial killer or something. But, oh my God, I understand his perspective now. Oh. Oh God. Okay. I can see why I'm having a problem with this book now, and it has nothing to do with the book itself. It has to do with me. We try so hard to keep our children safe. And one of the things I think we do is we try to protect them from the world earlier than we should. But I will argue, getting back to kind of before my crisis here, that isn't YA supposed to be a softened down version of adult books? Like less of the heavy stuff, like torture and sexual assault and murder and sex, like, right? If so, then what is the point of having YA as a genre if this stuff, which is all in this book, is now included? Because there's another book, Battle Royale, which features teenagers killing each other. There's murder, there's attempted sexual assault, there's a lot of stuff, there's child abuse, things like that. It's not YA. So what's the difference between these two books, really? I don't know. Like, is YA just because the characters happen to be under 20? Is it because it always has like a love triangle trope? I don't know. And that's a question I have for you guys. Tell me in the comments, what's the difference between Battle Royale in terms of everything and Iron Widow? Because they both have almost the same amount of, distressing content. I guess another thing, aside from, worrying about my children in the future, which I shouldn't worry about because I turned out just fine. Did I? I guess my issue, again, with this fast of this book is that Zetien does not in any way wrestle with, what she's done in terms of murdering and torturing people. She doesn't have guilt or feel distaste for what she's done out of rage. You do something like, you get mad at your dog and you yell at your dog and they kind of get sad and then you're like, oh, you feel terrible. And you're like, I'm so sorry, buddy. But, you came in the house covered in mud. Of course I yelled at you. And you like ate a skunk and it sprayed everywhere. You feel bad for what you did out of like crime of passion almost, but she doesn't. She doesn't kind of have this reflection. She goes back and makes a flippant joke about what happened and moves on to have sex with her boyfriends. Now she has been suffering quite a bit in her life due to patriarchy. So perhaps the novel is trying to say that the system she's restrained by has broken her ability to care about others, whom she sees as oppressors. But I don't think it's straightforward enough about that in the book or makes that connection very clear. The novel puts far more effort into the love triangle aspect, which I'll get into, than extrapolating on these ideas of ethics. And I think that's kind of not my problem with it, but that's just what I'm having trouble reconciling with in terms of, do I want my kid to read this when she's old enough if it isn't talking about the reason behind why someone would go down this path? I guess that's kind of where I'm at. And it's not so much, it's not like the book is bad or the book has bad ideas or anything like that. It's like me personally, how I'm reacting to this in my particular state at the time. Let's move on to the other characters. Let's get away from this. So they were fine. I didn't dislike Itzy or Shimin. They did seem to be two sides to the YA love interest coin though. Like you got the sensitive nice boy and the rough around the edges tortured soul boy. The only difference here is that the love triangle means polyamory and not the typical love triangle where they fight over the girl. This was a very nice change, a very, very, very welcome change actually. But quite frankly, the love story angle bored me to tears and I didn't care about it. But I'm also, as I've said, old, and teenagers in love fall strictly into the "oh, how cute" category rather than "what a powerful story of love." For me, I'm just like, oh, they're 17. Yeah, they're screwing around because they're 17. They're learning about their sexuality, I'm like, it's not really a love story. It's just a lust story. But that's me again, being old and jaded. And if you found this a very wonderful love story, I'm very happy that you got that out of there because I get love stories that are things that shouldn't probably be love stories. So everyone reads into things differently. And I think that having a polyamorous love triangle though, not love triangle or whatever, love relationship, that's the word I was looking for, is important, especially in YA, especially in today's society. So I thought that was great of the author to include that and to subvert that trope. I thought that was really good. It's just, it wasn't, for me, I'm just like, okay, good. I kind of wish the other characters had a bit more space, especially their advisor guy, Seema. He seemed to waver between detached and then fatherly, which made no sense. I think the scene, like, he didn't really get enough time for me to kind of understand who he was supposed to be, other than just this guy. Like, I couldn't tell if they liked him or if he liked the kids or what was going on. I did think the scene where he is flabbergasted that they hadn't had sex yet was so funny. I laughed so hard at his reaction to that. There's nothing else that's really funny in this book, but that part was quite funny. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to talk about, because I've rambled long enough, is that I 1,000,000,000% agree with the sentiments of the novel regarding patriarchy, feminism, gender roles, and misogyny. But I found it very heavy-handed and contradicted with Zetien's actions. So rather than Zetien using female friendship bonding as a way to circumvent or break down the patriarchy, she is combative to every woman she meets. Now, the book club members said that Zetien is angry with these other women because she doesn't understand why they won't side with her. And upon reflection, I totally agree. I didn't think about that when I first read it. I was just like, why are you fighting these women? Now I understand. She's angry. But, and maybe this isn't the trajectory the author was going for, so this is just an opinion on my part. Instead of Zetien disregarding these women completely after that point, where she gets mad at them, maybe if she'd been angry for a while and then had a moment where she recognizes, the intersectionality of feminism, how women are held down by oppression in different ways, by the same systems, and then if she tried to break down these barriers with the women, I would have been more impressed with that than her rage-fueled attacks. I understand the rage-fueled attacks because at 17, I was a very, very angry girl, and I think I really would have identified with this had I read it back then. But now with, 17 years, another 17 years under my belt, to me, it seems like, it's clear that she's not fighting for women. She's only fighting for herself, which isn't really the way to change society. It's also not feminism. Like, is she Margaret Thatcher? Now, as I said, she is 17 and a very angry girl. So this reaction from her isn't out of character at all. I'm not saying that my perception of this trajectory is wrong or bad, or that the author did a bad job. I'm just saying that this was kind of how I wished it would have gone, and I guess that's not really a fair thing to say. I just wish that the book, for all of the feminist statements that Zetien makes all the time, had a more feminist message via, having women and male allies working together to create change rather than just some angry girl murdering everybody. I think the ambition was there, and I applaud it. I did enjoy reading it. I think it's great the author tried to break away from the typical love triangle trope. I think it is a really, really good book. And hey, if the book spurs readers to attempt to rectify gender injustice in our societies, then that's great. One thing to get involved with is volunteering or donating to organizations that help girls attend school, donate to Planned Parenthood, or other organizations that help women with contraception and reproductive justice. And another is to work to dismantle the practice of female genital mutilation that still happens in developing nations today. So there are things that you can do. And I really think that this book, because it brings to light things that we kind of forget about the past, because a lot of these things like foot binding, things like that, did happen in the past. We forget that some of these things are still happening currently. So I'm just going to say, I guess, that I did really like it. I'm not trying to tear the book down. I'm actually giving it props. Props to the author for making me spend so much damn time thinking about this YA book, because usually I read a YA book and I completely forget it. So that's great. And I'm going to say that, again, I'm going to add that the cover here is fantastic. This is a beautiful cover. They did a fantastic job with it. And yeah, I'm going to keep it. Am I going to read the next one? I might. I'm not going to buy it, but if the library has it, then I will probably buy it. I'll probably read it. Will I let my 13-year-old read it? I still don't know about that. Probably. I just had to reconcile with the fact that when I was 13, I read a whole lot of stuff that I shouldn't have read. Most of this shelf here, Stephen King stuff, and I turned out perfectly fine. So, we'll see, I guess. If I'm doing this video in 10 years, we'll see. Maybe it'll be her reaction video. Will we still have video by then? Will the world be ended then? Who knows? Maybe we'll be fighting giant kaiju in mecha suits. That would be cool. Okay, thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments. I am open to discussing this book with you. If you try to, attack me because you don't like my views, I'm just gonna, ignore you, so good job. I don't know. I don't really care. I'm an old woman. I don't care what people on the internet think of me. So I just like to talk about books. So thanks. Bye.